All right, thank you, Jewel. And now, Jewel, I will say that is not what I told you last night to use as an introduction. I made the comment to Jewel yesterday evening after dinner. I said an appropriate introduction for today would be, holy crap, him again? But, so your introduction was much nicer, thank you. You know, we did have several sessions yesterday. One of them was on alliums. I was told yesterday evening that next year they would like to see something like that from a standpoint of tomatoes, where we go into a little more detail. This is not going to be that presentation. We're going to be talking about tomatoes. We're going to be talking about some peppers, vine crops, but predominantly what we're going to be talking about is trying to increase our understanding of how these plants grow. Because once we understand how that particular plant grows, then we can improve our management approaches and we can make adjustments mid-season to basically, I'm going to use the word fix, or at least attempt to fix whatever we're seeing that we're not liking. So, you know, every time I put a presentation together, and I've done this presentation probably 24 times, but every time is different. So one of the things I started getting curious about when I learned that I was going to be giving this presentation here is, okay, how do our guys compare to the average producer out there? So I got on the internet, which I spend hours every week on the internet, and based upon some of the information that I found in the Great Lakes region, Wisconsin, northern Illinois, northern Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, parts of New York, an average tomato yield under good management to somewhat high management, people are getting about 12 to 20 pounds of tomatoes per plant. And, you know, that's not completely unacceptable, but the question arises, is that hitting the ceiling? Is that hitting the maximum yield potential of a tomato plant? I think most of you in this room would agree, not even close. So what that tells me is that the average producer out there is not doing a very good job of maximizing his potential. Bell peppers, under good management, they're producing about 3 to 3.5 pounds per plant, which should, generally speaking, range from about 8 to 10 peppers. Again, when you compare that with our average grower, that's not very good at all. As a matter of fact, that's completely unacceptable with a lot of our growers. Watermelons, this is actually a high average for the general watermelon grower, 80 to 90 bins. A lot of our guys are producing in the 120 to 135 bins per acre. So again, not very good numbers. Yes. Cantaloupe, when I was doing that work, and I showed you some pictures yesterday out in eastern Colorado of onion fields, that grower also grew a lot of cantaloupe. Generally speaking, 300 or 400 acres in any given year. Average cantaloupe production back then, and this matched very well with his production, was about 1.2 cantaloupes per plant. Again, completely unacceptable. In the Great Lakes region, we're pulling out about an average of 2 to 3 per plant. In my opinion, still completely unacceptable. Jack pumpkins, 2 to 3 per plant. That's actually not horrible, but a lot of our guys, the better growers, they again are pulling in 130 to 135, just under 140 bins per acre, which is much more than 2 or 3 per plant. We've got a project that we're going to undertake this season, grower in southern Ohio. I think I mentioned this yesterday. Our goal is 200 bins per plant on Jack pumpkins. I will tell you right now, I don't think we'll get there. Huh? 200 bins per acre. per acre, excuse me. Definitely we're not going to hit 200 bins per plant. Yeah, I'm pretty confident, but I am not that confident. But, you know, I doubt seriously that we're going to hit 200 bins per acre this coming season. But I tell you what we will discover is how to take it up another 10, 15% the following year. Because we will identify what walls did we hit here? What was our limiting factors? And then we can start thinking and gaining understanding on how can I overcome that limiting factor. Once we overcome that, guess what? There's going to be another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. It never stops. But that's why growing produce is so exciting, because we are only hitting a very small fraction of the percentage of what that plant's capable of giving us, and yet getting that small percentage, we're making really good money and we're really happy. So some of the things we're going to discuss today is just some of the things that I look at when I'm looking at a crop. It all begins with this. In my opinion, I believe that the natural world, you can say God's creation, you can say Mother Nature, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But I believe that that world that we live in, it operates in a very orderly manner. Are there chaotic events? Sure there are. A lot of them are caused by us. But for the most part, the natural functions that are taking place on this planet, they're very orderly. We can anticipate things based upon this order. And I know that all of us in this room, we earn our living from what this natural world or Mother Nature is going to give us. So again, we need to accept that this is really important, that this planet we live on, it operates in an orderly manner. So saying that, I believe that if we understand better how this planet operates, what are the natural functions that's taking place with our soils? What's the natural functions that are taking place with our environmental conditions? What's the natural functions that are taking place within my tomato plant, my pepper plant, my watermelon plant, whatever? The more that we understand this, the better that we can achieve a higher level of success. So there's several things that we need to understand. First is the soil is a living community. We talked about this yesterday. I talked about it. John talked about it. It's vibrantly alive, hopefully. Hopefully it's vibrantly alive. It's supposed to be. Even desert environments are vibrantly alive. I made the comment yesterday. I recommend that everybody get a book called Tales from the Underground by David Wolf. And I still make that recommendation to everyone. They have found thriving microbial communities around sea vents where the temperature of the water is basically above boiling. And yet there's organisms that have adapted to fit that environment. Every place that we have on this planet is basically potentially vibrantly alive. And we need to understand that. We need to accept it. And the better that we accept it, the better that we can work into a position where we're going to receive benefits from that life. John mentioned this yesterday. Number 2 is the plant is nothing but an energy conversion factory. We need to understand that's all a plant is at its most basic. Capturing solar energy. John mentioned there is chemical energy potentially in a soil environment through microbial interaction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the plant is nothing but an energy conversion factory, converting basically solar energy into potential chemical energy, predominantly in the form of sugars. That's what a plant is. So once we understand that, we have a choice. I want to build a garage-sized factory, or I want to build a 8-acre factory. We have that choice. That's up to us. How big of a factory we choose to grow and develop. Now there are other things coming in, such as environmental conditions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but still we have the option of growing the size of the factory that we want. The other thing that we need to understand, plants are living organisms. Well, that's obvious. Of course they're alive. Dead plant's not good for anything outside of maybe potential compost. But plants grow, they reproduce, and here's the important part, they communicate with each other. They're constantly in communication with each other. When you're out looking at your tomato plant, do you often think that that tomato plant is talking to that tomato plant over there? It is. It is all the time. And I apologize to the female members of the audience. Plants are just like a bunch of old women, just chatting away. And I will admit right now, in the interest of being fair, we guys are actually worse than that than y'all are. I mean, it's just, they're just little chatterboxes. They're always talking to each other. I mentioned yesterday when we were talking about plant immune responses, when we mow grass, that smell of fresh mown grass, that's that grass that we just mowed down telling all the other grass, there's a maniac out here. Start going protective. These plants are always communicating with each other. I read about a study, this goes back about 20 years ago. They hooked up some little electrical sensitive devices to carrots. They pulled this carrot right here, a carrot 20 feet away got all excited. So these plants are always communicating with each other. Now, as I said here, you can disagree with me about any of this, but I'll tell you right now, you're going to be wrong. And I do love to argue. So if anybody wants to discuss this more later after the presentation, I'll be glad to talk. But so again, my recommendation is let's just accept these principles. This is the environment that we're dealing in. This is the situation that's going to determine our success in growing our plants. And as such, we all need to strive to become more fluent in the language of plant. How many of you are multilingual here? Anybody fluent in Spanish? Well, you guys are, of course, English and whatever it is you call your native language. But, we need to add a new language. We need to add the language of plant. Because plants, like I said, they're always talking, they're always communicating, and they're wanting to tell us, not just a daily basis, but an hourly basis, an every minute basis. They're wanting to tell us, this is how I'm feeling. I think they do understand. It's up to us to take care of them. They can't do a lot of this stuff on their own. They're always talking to us. So, becoming fluent in the language of plant, the first thing that we need to do is we need to understand, how does this plant grow? It's never haphazard. Plants grow in a very orderly manner, and as such we can listen or observe, and we can communicate with our plants and help offset some of the issues that they happen to be going through at that particular point in time. Like I said here, we can, well, I'm going to back up here. Oftentimes in a growing season, we have disease issues. And as growers, a lot of times we will come into that situation and we'll say, okay, I'm going to put on this fungicide, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that chemistry, et cetera, et cetera. What are we really doing there? What we're doing in those situations is we're treating symptoms. Now, I know you guys do not watch TV, and you're kind of fortunate in that respect. But those of us that do watch TV, how many of you have seen any pharmaceutical company commercial in the last 30 days? It's hard to go 10 minutes without seeing one. And basically, we've got drugs out there to treat the symptoms of almost anything now. But are we addressing the underlying issue? Are we addressing the underlying problem that's making these symptoms become apparent? Until we get down to the actual base issue, we're not really solving anything. So when we do see issues out there, the more fluent you can become in plant, the better you're going to understand, okay, I'm seeing this. Why I'm seeing this is because of something else. And I can take care of the something else. So another thing that I want everybody to remember is yield. How many of you in the room are hitting 30 pounds per plant of tomatoes? Oh, come on now. I know some of you are. Boy, this is a shy group. One guy over here is ready to admit it. You know, that's not bad. That's well above the national average. You never weigh it. Well, see, I weigh everything. But I know some of you guys are probably hitting 30 pounds per plant, certainly 25 pounds. That I know. It could very well be closer to 50 pounds. But the reason I'm asking that, and the thing that I want everybody to understand, yield is nothing but math. How many of you in the room love math? You just love working with numbers. Good, because to me, that's one of the joys of life, is working with numbers and trying to understand statistics and things like this. But yield is nothing but math. How many of you have a yield goal for this next season? One person. I highly, highly recommend everybody have a yield goal. And I ask that question a lot, and I get answers like, well, as much as I can get. That's not a yield goal. That's just a nonsense statement. I mean, have a specific yield goal. Because once we have that yield goal, we're beginning to paint a picture in our mind of how I want my factory to look. Ray, back there in the back of the room, he is wanting to build a new production facility or add on to our current production facility. I can guarantee you right now, before he ever puts the first shovel in the ground, he's going to have an exact idea of how this building's supposed to look. He's going to know the size of it. He's going to know the sidewall height. He's going to know everything there is to know about that building. And that's why I say a yield goal is important, because you can start painting the picture of the design of this plant, the way you want it to look as the season progresses. So I do believe that the highest yield potential is when the seed is still in the package. From that point on, from the point of time that we put that seed in a growing environment, yield potential is going to start getting knocked off, which is why I have a little picture of a bunch of seeds there. We're never going to achieve maximum potential. I don't think that's possible. But talking about math, let's say that based upon your operation, you need $250,000 worth of tomatoes. Okay, that's a nice income for a tomato crop. You know, based upon historical pricing, that across the season, you average $1.50 a pound. That's, hopefully it's better than that. But let's say that that's your season-long average. So if that's the case, I need $250,000. I'm going to average $1.50. I need 166,667 pounds of tomatoes. I've got 2 acres I'm going to be growing tomatoes on. That's about 8,000 plants. So basically, I need about 83,000 pounds of tomatoes per acre, about 20.84 pounds of tomatoes per plant. The variety I'm growing, they're going to average about 0.6 of a pound, a little over half a pound. That means I need about 35 tomatoes per plant. Needing 35 tomatoes per plant, let's say I average 4 fruits per truss. And a lot of them will give you a lot more than that, but I normally recommend trimming to 4 unless you have a canning market. But that means I need basically 8.5 trusses where I'm getting my 4 fruits per truss. You're going to get a truss about every node and a half, starting with a node about 7. So basically I need 13 nodes on that plant with 4 fruits per node, and I've hit my $250,000. I can't miss it.
Well, if you get some wide combine going through.
If I get some wide combine going through my tomato field, well, that's why they make guns.
He's talking about hail.
Oh, hail. Well, you can use a gun on hail all day long and it will have no effect. But let's just talk about hail. That plant is severely damaged, perhaps, and you do make a management decision. Okay, this is the level of damage upon my plant. Let's say you're driving down the road back home. You're in a car wreck. Are they just going to leave you on the side of the road?
Depends who sees me.
It depends on who sees him, he says. I'm willing to bet, no, they're not. They're going to load you up in a special little wagon, and they're going to take you to a medical emergency unit, and they're going to start fixing you, hopefully. So we can do the same thing with our plants. When we get these major weather events moving through, we don't just sit there and go, oh, well, shucks. We go out and we analyze what level of damage do I have. I've got to start fixing this. I've got to start repairing this plant because that plant is going to go into severe shock. It's going to be highly stressful. Bad things are going to happen. But the level of bad can be managed based upon how well you basically put that plant into emergency treatments to get it going again. That's all fixable, unless you got a stub that big left. Then it's called, oops. That's the way it goes sometimes. So anyway, knowing the math, I encourage everybody, I want you to start thinking about how you want your tomato plant to look come August, how you want your pepper crop to look come August. I'm talking about plant size. I'm talking about fruit loads. Start envisioning all of this because this vision you have really is important because you're going to ask yourself almost on a daily basis, is this plant tracking along with the image in my mind? Is it doing what I want it to be doing at that point in the season? I do think variety selection is important based upon what your goals are. And I really believe that when the crop's that size, that's a really important part of the season right there. When it's emerging, when it's starting to build the beginnings of a vegetative frame. So, tomatoes, peppers, I normally like to have them direct seeded into a 72 cell count tray. Some guys like going to 4 inches. I don't like that at all because I want to transplant when that tomato leaf is just initiating the 4th leaf. When that pepper plant is just initiating the 4th leaf. I do not want to be transplanting a plant that's a foot tall and it's got 10, 11, 12 nodes on it. Or worse yet, it's a foot tall and it's got 3, 4 nodes on it. Really leggy. I don't want that. So some of the things that we do, and you can see some little pepper plants coming up in the trays. You can see some that I've pulled out showing root differential. We really believe strongly in using seeding stimulants, rooting stimulants at that point in the season. We really believe strongly in using silicates at that point in the season to strengthen the seedling stalk, the strength of that young plant. And silicates have shown that we control legginess to a very large degree. And you see those little plants right here. You can see the cotyledons. These pepper plants are basically just initiating leaf 3, some of them leaf 4. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm basically initiating leaf 6. So I'm already 2 whole leaves ahead of where I did not use some of these materials. And again, we're in a race somewhat to the season. We want to get that plant into a reproductive frame of mind and a reproductive size as quick as we can because the season is limited. This is another example. Now this was some CBD cannabis. We were doing some projects several years back. These, the seed company had 4 varieties that did not meet germination standards. So they was basically junk, just trash. Well, we asked for some where we were using the rooting stimulants, where we were using our starter program. This is the way the little seedlings look. The control was the other tray. We can really impact the plant vigor at this point in the season. And I want to get to a transplanting size as quick as I can. That seedling that I've got in my hand there, to me, that's about the perfect size. Maybe I would wait another day or two to have that root ball just a little bit firmer, but that is a perfect size plant. I'm initiating leaf 4. And when I say initiating, I'm not talking about the leaf itself is completely visible, but I can see the little bud of the leaf coming out. It's just initiating, it's just starting. Part of why I like that, a plant this size, as opposed to a larger plant, is because one of my first objectives, once I do my transplanting, is I want that seedling to become very comfortable in its environment. Transplanting is a shock to these plants. We've ripped them out of one home, we've placed them in another. So it's fairly shocking. I want them to get very comfortable with its new home before we get into the working part of the season, or you could call it reproduction. So I want to overcome that transplant shock as soon as I can. You can see we got a little bit of a purplish coloration in that leaf. I did see that. As such, I came in with a little bit higher phosphate. We were purposely using a low phosphate plant food in this situation to basically limit vegetative growth, stretchiness. And one thing I might say, try and avoid larger plants. I've seen guys transplanting tomatoes that they're this tall. Walmart, this just drives me nuts. You go into Walmart, you can see these tomato plants this big. That's trash now. That's nothing that should be sold. That's nothing that anybody should buy. That is garbage now. So try and avoid these larger plants, particularly if they have fruiting forms on them, because that plant has already started going basically reproductive. It's going to be much more shocking to it when you transplant it. I've read research that on cucurbits, particularly seedless watermelons, you need to have them transplanted in the field by the 4th leaf. You can start getting into serious potential reproductive issues later in the season if you have more than 4 leaves on them. Yeah.
Would you take the fruit off if it does?
Okay, the question is, if I have a plant that's got some fruiting forms on it, would I take them off? Generally speaking, the answer is going to be yes, but that's going to depend upon the individual. I've talked to guys that's what they have. They couldn't get them transplanted outside. It's too wet. This is what they have. What do I do now? So I asked them the question, do you want to try and save that fruit? You can do it. It's going to be a chore.
But if you do, give your plant a better chance.
He says, if I pull them off, will I give my plant a better chance? I will take stress off my plant.
Then you're probably better off doing it.
He says, you're probably better off doing it. I'm going to say again, that depends upon the individual. Some guys, and part of it, the reason I say that is, okay, the price of tomatoes in late May and the first half of June is generally speaking 6 to 10 times higher than the price of tomatoes in late July and August. So a lot of guys are going for an early market. If that's your potential, then it makes sense. Let's try and salvage this crop and salvage those fruiting forms so we can have something to sell in that early market. But generally speaking, the answer is going to be yes. Pull those things off. Take that potential stress away from the plant. Things to consider when we're going into a transplanting early growth situation. We need to consider our heat source, our environment, the growing medium that we're using, variety selection again, and I'm just going to keep hammering on variety selection over and over and over. The nutritional aspects that we have to deal with, water schedule, water quality, cleanliness, airflow, potential plant diseases, insect pressure. Guy that we used to work with, he made the comment one time in a meeting, watering is the hardest job on the operation. And I thought to myself when I heard that, well, that's nonsense. I can think of a lot of things harder. Then I started thinking about it. You know, he's right. That's the hardest thing that there is to do on the farm is the watering schedule. Why? Because too little water, we're not going to achieve potential. Too much water, we're going to create a situation where disease is probably going to come to the forefront. And that's really easy to do when we're growing our seedlings for later transplanting. Just a little bit too much water, Pythium will show up, Rhizoc will show up, Phytophthora will show up. It just can be a real bad situation. We need to consider the support system if we're going to use one that we're going to have later in the season. We need to start getting all that stuff ready. We need to consider the pollination environment. Is the environment going to be suitable for pollination? This is, again, one of the farms I work with in Wisconsin. Now, here we were using the rooting stimulant. We were using multiple plant foods. The point I'm trying to make, I took several varieties of tomatoes over there to him, and then most of his tomatoes he got out of a grower in Iowa. This is what he got out of Iowa. Pretty much that's trash again. That's what we had, so we worked with it. We didn't throw them away, that's all we had. But for the most part, that's pretty much trash. Look at the distance between leaf nodes as opposed to here. This is too leggy. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that's a little leggy, but this plant structure is much better than that plant structure. So, again, this is a very important time in the season, is getting them ready for transplanting, try and avoid legginess, try and avoid severe curling or pigtailing of the root in a particular cell. A lot of guys, they do leave them too long, particularly if you're growing in a 72. You'll get some pigtailing of the roots going around like that. If you see that, it's normally best just go ahead and pinch them off. And because roots can just continue to do that. Just showing strong starts. This is another operation in Wisconsin. The picture on the right is where we used our program during emergence, early growth. The picture on the left is where he used his old program, and there was a very noticeable difference in plant vigor. I will say this, ours was put into the ground, transplanted, I believe, a day earlier than the others. But a day's difference is not going to make the difference there that we're seeing in plant vigor and its ability to start taking off. So, okay, now we're into the growing part of the season. And this sounds obvious, but it really is important. Again, I'm wanting you all to picture these plants as they're growing and developing throughout the season. The first question is, what part of the plant am I going to be harvesting? I'm going to use tomatoes again. Does anybody in the room have a market for tomato vegetation? If so, please let me know. Because I will probably just completely saturate that market. There is no market for tomato vegetation. It's tomato fruits. That's what I'm growing. So I want a nice, beautiful plant, but more importantly, I want a lot of fruiting forms. If I'm growing lettuce, has anybody got a market for lettuce root? We did talk to a lady, celery roots apparently got a limited market, and I'm going to have to try and grow some. But, you know, we're growing specific plants to market specific parts of that plant. So we need to understand that if I'm growing a root crop, I'm going to treat it a little bit differently than if I'm growing a bush such as a tomato plant. And part of how we kind of differentiate between that is if I'm growing a root crop, I want to be fairly aggressive early on from a vegetative standpoint. I want that plant to grow. I want a lot of vegetation up there above ground, because the more vegetation I have above ground, the more energy I'm going to be able to collect to build that root once that root development begins. Now, once I start seeing some root development, okay, then I'm going to switch. I've had my vegetative window, so to speak. Now I want that plant to concentrate on building the root, the energy storage structure of that plant. By doing that, I'm going to start bringing minerals into the profile. I also am well aware that I was way too heavy in the nitrogen, which I need to draw that back as far as a plant component, because nitrogen tastes like garbage. It just really tastes bad. So I'm trying to bring the sugars. And John's going to talk about high bricks here later on this morning. I'm bringing the minerals in to start building the bricks, sweetness, flavor profiles, and firmness of those root crops. Vegetative crops, it's going to be predominantly vegetative throughout most of the season. I want to encourage more and more and more vegetation. Before I harvest, I am going to come in with calcium. I'm going to come in with potassium, again, to offset the nitrogen that I've been pushing to develop vegetative aspects of the plant. So right at the end, before harvest, I'm going to bring flavor profile back into it. Fruiting crops, I'm really a little balanced at the beginning. I want some vegetative development, but I do not want it to start taking off and trying to get aggressively overly vegetative. I'm going to have a minor vegetative push. Once I start seeing some early fruiting forms becoming visible, I'm going to really start switching to the mineral. And if I have a history of early blight, I'm going to switch to minerals 3 to 4 days following transplanting. To me, early blight on tomatoes is nothing but a potassium deficiency. You're just fertilizing wrong. There's just something wrong with your management practices. I'm well aware that depending upon the variety of tomato that I'm growing, I may have enough success on setting fruiting forms that the plant was wanting to slow down. Well, I'm not ever going to be happy with a tomato plant that's 2.5 foot tall. I'm never going to be happy with that. I want my tomato plants, and I get tickled. Some of the guys I've worked with in Wisconsin, their tomato stakes are 3 foot long. I'm going, what's that? It may be suitable for a pepper plant, probably not. It's definitely not suitable for tomato plants. So next season, and it wasn't anywhere suitable, so I already told them next season I want you guys to have some 5.5, 6 foot tomato stakes in here, because we're not going to do what we did last year. And anyway, the little teeter-totter thing, one of the things that we do at ISP is we are continually watching these plants grow and develop, and we're making decisions based upon what we expect to see. Do I need to go vegetative? This vegetative, another way of saying that is water and nitrogen. Or do I need to slow down the vegetative development? Do I want to encourage fruiting forms, reproduction? Another way of saying that is mineral. We're continually manipulating these ratios of vegetative push, reproductive push, based upon what we're seeing with the plant. It's really important to have a nutrient delivery system. If you're growing produce, you're not set up on a drip system, or you don't have some other very effective way of delivering nutrient, then your yield goal, I tell you right now, do not set an excessively high yield goal. Accept what you can get and be happy with it, because once you start pushing for higher yields, you are going to put in more and more and more stress upon that plant, and you're not going to like what's going to happen. I make the comment all the time, aside from these major weather events, the hail, where it just mowed your crop off, nothing is more stressful to a plant than fruit load. Nothing. It can be 115 degrees. It can be 120 degrees for 2 or 3 days. That's still not as stressful as a heavy fruit load. Hail is more stressful. So what I'm showing here is a greenhouse in northern Indiana. It was for Amish purposes. I also do not recommend putting different varieties in the house if you're going to be irrigating through the same drip system. You can see the heirloom varieties at the left of this picture as opposed to a determinate variety as opposed to some peppers. This was all for show, and we do not recommend doing this. But once we start getting that plant into the ground where we're going to be growing it, we're going to start building the frame. I really pay attention to the early frame development. Now, Mountain Fresh Plus, I guess you could probably still find that variety if you looked really hard. It's not a bad variety. Has high yield potential. It's pretty determinate. But I do think there's better varieties. But I've used this picture for probably 7, 8 years now, simply because it's a beautiful little tomato plant. I'm already seeing older leaf degradation, which is some nutrient stress. But on this plant, I have 10, 11 nodes on the main stem. I'm already seeing some suckering, and we had suckered this plant once, but I'm already seeing secondary branching or suckering coming out, which at that point in the season we're going to leave. I've also got 3 fruiting trusses already initiated on that plant. We can easily see one, because there's an open blossom right there. But there's 2 other fruiting trusses on that plant that I could easily see. They're up in the top. So this has got a really nice frame. Yes?
How many suckers do you take off?
Well,
Determinate.
on a determinate plant, and Brad, you may want to put your advice in here. I sucker my determinate plants. I always sucker them once. And I will go, and I will normally sucker within a couple of days following transplanting, because I will already see some suckers. I normally pull 2 or 3 off per plant. And then beyond, after that, I just don't have time. I don't have time to be out there continually suckering, unless I'm growing indeterminate tomatoes in a greenhouse environment. So that's up to you. You can sucker clear up to September. It's still putting them out. It's still, well, as a matter of fact, it's still putting out new suckers come frost when the plant dies. That never stops.
You don't want to take off too many, do you?
Well, I don't. He says you don't want to take off too many. Well, I don't. Because every time the reason I do early suckering is I'm wanting to, again, take some of the potential nutrient demand off that plant. I want it to build that central stalk in a very strong manner. I want it to start going reproductive, so I'm purposely pulling off vegetative parts of the plant. Like I said, I sucker once. I don't sucker after that, because every time I pull a sucker off after that, I'm probably pulling off another 7, 8 pounds of potential fruiting forms. So that's a nice tomato frame. This is a field in Wisconsin. The left half of this picture here, the gentleman used our transplant solution. Over here, he did not. And he was just so excited to show me this. This is Richards. I'm sure you recognize the field, Brad. But Richard was really excited to show me that day that I was there. He goes, "Come look at this." And it kind of evened out as the season progressed. It really wasn't visible probably for much more than a week to 10 days following the day I took that picture. But it's still important from a standpoint of my initial goal is to start building that plant frame. I have to have a lot of places to put fruiting forms. Initiating trusses. Most tomatoes, you will see that first truss at about node 7 to node 9. It's not the same. I can take, like in Robert Pierce's farm, he had 4,000 red deuce tomatoes. Not every tomato initiated the first truss at the same node. It was between node 7 and node 9. And that's okay. But somewhere between node 7 and node 9, you should see that first truss start to initiate. That's really important to me. One of the things I'm going to start looking at when I see that first truss, I'm still watching my overall frame development, my node spacing. I do not want 6, 7, 8 inches between nodes. I want to keep that down. If I can keep that down to a 4-inch average across the season, that's really, really, really good. That allows me to build a large frame without a plant that's getting overly leggy. I'm looking at the leaf coloration. Is it got proper coloration? I'm looking at the leaf size. Some of those early leaves on tomato seedlings, they might be this big. Well, I'll also tell you they can be that big. So I want a big leaf. And the reason, again, for that, it goes back to energy collection. So I'm looking at all this stuff. But at the same time, when I start seeing my fruiting trusses, I'm going to count how many potential fruiting forms do I have there. Chances are it's going to be somewhere between 8 and 11. You don't want 8 and 11 fruits on that truss. But that's telling you that, okay, this high number, that plant is feeling very, very good. I've got a high yield potential here. The plant's not getting tired. The plant's not under any undue stress. And I'm going to count the number of fruiting forms on these trusses all season long. You look at a red deuce tomato that may have from 8 to 11 fruiting forms on the first truss. You go out there in August, it's not uncommon, you see 2. Well, that's that plant just screaming in agony that I am wore out. I mean, I'm exhausted. Because the number of potential fruiting forms on every truss is related back to how much energy does that plant have on the day that that fruiting truss was initiated. That plant is very self-centered. It's a diva to the extreme. It's constantly asking itself, how do I feel? How do I feel? Well, how do I feel right now? Oh my goodness. How do I feel this moment? It just never stops. You're not taking very good care of me. Bud, you didn't give me that beer that evening. You're just not taking very good care of me at all. So that's why I'm always looking at those older leaves. On cucurbits, I'm always looking again at the older leaf for any degradation. I'm always looking at the ratio of male to female flowers. We have that beautiful little female sitting there. Yes. Okay, I'm going to have to hurry then. But I'm always looking at the ratio of male to female fruiting forms. Females do not look like males. And the fruiting, the female shown on the bottom there will always have a little barrel right below the bud. Males, just a straight stem right below the bud. On cantaloupes, I like about 1 female, and I might say this, all the initial blooming on your winter squash, your summer squash, your watermelons, your cantaloupes, all of those will be male initially. And then once you go through that male flush of blooms, you should start seeing some females show up. On cantaloupes, I like about 1 female to every 5, 6 males. Seedless watermelon, I like 1 female to every 7 to 9, maybe 10 male fruiting forms. On jack pumpkins, I'm pretty happy if I get 1 female to every 15 male blooms. So what do I do if I'm not seeing this ratio? Well, over here is male flowers. I said this was vegetation. I said this was nitrogen earlier. You can adjust the sex of these blooms through nutrition. This is male, this is female over here. So if you're not seeing the number of females that you're wanting to see, that's telling me that, okay, I need to push some mineral here. I need to signal this plant from a nutritional standpoint, give me some more female fruiting forms. That's manageable. I'm always looking at the open flowers, and open flowers should be wide open, not all pinched and closed, things like this. Again, pollination is predominantly wind, so I want that flower open to the wind. I'm looking at the growing point coloration. This is probably a little bit on the life side. light side, but I want the center of these newly emerging leaves to be a little bit paler on tomatoes with a darker green edge around all of the leaflets. It looks really fresh. It looks like a summer morning when you walk out, or a late spring morning. You walk out and everything's green, the dew's glistening off with the sunlight. It's just fresh looking. If it's too dark green, that's telling me I'm too heavy over on this side. I've got too much nitrogen in the scenario. If it's too yellow, then I don't have enough nitrogen in the scenario. If it's kind of a grayish green, that's telling you you're heading down the highway at 90 miles an hour and there's a semi blocking the highway about 100 yards in front of you. And this is not going to be pretty. So that coloration is really important. I'm looking at vegetative cover all the time. What's wrong with that picture? We haven't got any cover on those watermelons and they're already starting to sunburn. Everything we grow will sunburn. So I need good, adequate vegetative cover. Fruit uniformity, I'm always looking at that. This is two fruiting trusses. But look at the size difference between the first set fruit and the last. It's okay. I mean, it's still going to give me poundage. But most of my guys, we sell into the #1 tomato market. We don't have a big canning market. So I'm always looking for fruit size uniformity. If I start seeing a large size differential, that's probably telling me, okay, I'm not feeding enough. I'm getting low in energy again. I like to see something like this. Now, there's a couple blossoms down there. They never pollinated. That's okay. I mean, if they had, I'd probably been pulling some of these fruits off anyway. This is really important, particularly if you grow red deuce. Red deuce will stop vegetating if you've achieved a heavy fruit load. In the cotton world, we call that cutout. So I've gone into houses where, I mean, it is absolutely, visually is absolutely gorgeous. Yellow everywhere. I never want to see that, ever. Because that's telling me my vegetative development is starting to slow down. I'm going to start seeing a decrease, particularly if this is early August, because I've still got 3 months of season left. I want to go to frost. So I'm always watching where my new fruiting forms are placed. Again, and I've said this half a dozen times, I'm always looking at my oldest vegetation. That's where you're going to see stress first. There's things that you can do. If you start seeing some visual things that you don't like, you can take a tissue analysis. You can take a sap analysis. I carry these instruments here with me this past season. I can test for potassium. I can test for calcium, nitrate, nitrogen, pH, Brix. I can do a lot of testing that tells me a lot that will either verify or help answer a question about something I'm visually seeing. You can do all this, and I recommend it, frankly. So, again, I've just got several things. I mean, this particular house here, I was in there in late September, early October. This is what was laying on the concrete floor. The left picture. The right picture is the fruit load that was still on those tomato plants. And like I said, we had 66 pounds sold last year, based upon what Mike told me. Another client, I mean, that's uniform fruit size on that left picture. That's what I'm always looking for. This gentleman's name was Joe Skelly. Showed that picture on the right yesterday. He didn't ever pick those. He had no market. Completely overproduced his market. I showed that picture yesterday. Heath Farms over in Wisconsin. I found it interesting. They don't sell bell peppers per se. They sell cored bell peppers. All the bell peppers that they grow, they run them through this machine that cuts them into several pieces. Then they have 4 or 5 people standing there pulling the cores out. And then they sell pre-cored bell peppers for processing. It's actually kind of fun. I wanted to sit there for several hours pulling cores out, but the people doing it said, no, you ain't qualified. So, like I said, all of that just I mean, this down in Indiana, like I said, a lot of my guys on watermelons were getting 120, upwards of 125 bins per acre, jack pumpkins.
How did you fast forward to 24 like that?
Huh? Well, because I'm already thinking ahead. So, anyway, to sum it all up, improve your soil potential. Grow a vigorous seedling, transplant that seedling at the proper size, get aggressive with early frame development, have adequate to high fertility. One of the wisest things that I've ever been told throughout my entire life, I was with a tomato grower in west central Indiana. I told him, I think you're over-fertilizing these tomatoes. You're just overdoing it. And his comment, and he stopped dead in his tracks, and he looked up at me, and the guy's only about yay tall. He said, you know, he said, you may be right. He said, but I'd rather waste a little money putting on too much than suffer the consequences of not having enough. When he said that, I felt, Gary, how stupid can you be? Just beyond stupid what I had said. But anyway, proper watering, proper node spacing, always monitor that. Fruit potential, fruit abortion numbers, oldest leaf degradation, vegetative coloration, mid and late season frame development. All of that is really important, and always be aware of the various stress factors. So with that, I am done.